In 1909, one of the most famous writers in the world sat down for an interview and calmly predicted the exact circumstances of his own death. "I came in with Halley's comet in 1835, he said. "It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it." He was not being poetic. He meant it literally. The man was Mark Twain, author of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And what happened next has been called one of the most extraordinary coincidences in recorded history. Except, was it really a coincidence? When you understand the astronomy behind what Twain actually knew, and what happened in the months before his death, the story becomes something far stranger and far more interesting than simple luck. Intro 040 to 1 o'clock. Welcome back to the hidden archive where history hides its secrets. Today we are investigating one of history's most famous predicted deaths and the surprising science behind it. Subscribe if you're new. A new mystery every week. To understand Mark Twain's prediction, you first need to understand Halley's Comet. Halley's Comet is the most famous comet visible from Earth, a massive ball of ice and rock that orbits the Sun approximately once every 75 to 76 years. It is named after astronomer Edmund Halley, who in 1705 calculated that comets sighted in 1531, 1607, and 1682 were actually the same object, and correctly predicted its return in 1758, 16 years after his own death. Halley's Comet has been observed and recorded by human civilizations for over 2,000 years, with the earliest confirmed sighting recorded by Chinese astronomers in 240 BC. Samuel Langhorne Clemens, the man who would become famous under his pen name, Mark Twain, was born on November 30, 1835. Halley's Comet made one of its closest approaches to Earth that same month. Twain grew up knowing this fact about his birth. It was a point of family pride, mentioned regularly throughout his life. And as he grew older, and understood that the comet operated on a predictable 75 to 76 year cycle, he began to draw a conclusion that many found darkly humorous at the time. If the comet was there when he arrived, perhaps it would be there when he left. By 1909, Twain was 73 years old, in declining health, and had suffered the loss of his wife and two of his daughters in the preceding years. He gave several interviews discussing his approaching death with a characteristic mixture of humor and fatalism. In one widely quoted account from his biographer, Albert Bigelow Paine, Twain stated, "I came in with Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go out with it. It will be the greatest disappointment of my life if I don't go out with Halley's Comet. The Almighty has said, no doubt, now here are these two unaccountable freaks, they came in together, they must go out together." This was not an isolated comment. Twain repeated variations of this prediction multiple times in his final year, to multiple people, well documented by contemporary journalists and his own biographer. Halley's Comet reached its perihelion, its closest point to the Sun, on April 20, 1910. Mark Twain died the following day, on April 21, 1910. He had predicted the circumstances of his own death, in specific astronomical terms, roughly a year in advance. And he was right. This is where the story gets genuinely interesting from a scientific perspective, because the answer is more nuanced than pure coincidence. First, let's establish what Twain actually knew and predicted. He knew, correctly, that he was born during a close approach of Halley's Comet in 1835. He knew, correctly, based on published astronomical calculations available at the time, that the comet operated on a roughly 75 to 76 year cycle and would return around 1910. This was not mystical knowledge, it was publicly available scientific fact, calculated using Newtonian orbital mechanics that astronomers had refined for over a century. The genuinely uncertain part was whether Twain himself would still be alive when the comet arrived and whether he would die specifically around its closest approach, rather than months before or after. Twain was 74 years old in 1909, well past the average life expectancy for American men at the time, which was approximately 48 years, though this statistic is skewed heavily by high infant and childhood mortality. A man who reached his 70s in 1909 could reasonably expect to live into his late 70s or 80s. He was also, by his own and his doctor's accounts, suffering from angina, a heart condition, throughout his final year. His health was visibly declining in ways that made his own death within the following year or two a realistic, though not certain, possibility. So the accurate scientific framing is this: Twain made an educated guess, based on real astronomical knowledge and a realistic assessment of his declining health, that placed reasonable odds on a dramatic coincidence, and then he happened to be correct, dying the day after the comet's closest approach. Let's actually calculate how remarkable this coincidence really was. Halley's comet's visible period around its 1910 approach, when it would have been prominently visible and discussed in the press, lasted approximately several months, from around February to June of 1910. If we assume Twain, given his declining health, had a realistic probability of dying sometime within a 1 to 2 year window around this period, and we compare that to the several-month window during which the comet was prominently in the news and visible, the coincidence, while remarkable, is not astronomically improbable. It falls within a range that statisticians would describe as a notable but plausible coincidence, rather than a mathematical impossibility. This is actually a well-documented feature of human psychology, called confirmation bias, combined with the retrospective significance we assign to predictions that come true. We remember Twain's prediction because it came true. We don't typically hear about the countless predictions people make about their own deaths that don't align so neatly with notable events, because those predictions simply fade from memory. However, and this is important, this does not diminish the story. It actually makes it more interesting. Twain wasn't guessing randomly. He was making an informed prediction based on real astronomical science, applied to his own realistic mortality, and the universe, in this case, cooperated with his math. Twain's case is famous, but he is far from the only historical figure whose death carried an eerie predictive quality. Nostradamus, the 16th century French astrologer, is famous for supposedly predicting his own death. According to his secretary, Jean de Chavigny, Nostradamus told him the night before he died in 1566, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." He was found dead the next morning. However, historians note Nostradamus was severely ill with gout and dropsy at the time, making this less a mystical prediction and more an accurate assessment of his own declining condition, similar to Twain's case. Abraham Lincoln reportedly told his wife and friends about a recurring dream in the days before his assassination in 1865, describing a dream in which he saw a coffin in the White House and asked a guard who had died, receiving the answer, "The President." He was killed by an assassin. This account comes from his friend Ward Hill Lamon's memoirs, written after Lincoln's death, meaning the story cannot be independently verified from before the assassination, and some historians question its reliability as a result. Arnold Schwarzenegger's mother-in-law, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, and several other Kennedy family members have had eerie premonitions documented around family tragedies, though these anecdotes are, similarly, difficult to verify rigorously. What separates Twain's case from most of these is the specificity and public documentation. Twain's prediction was recorded by journalists and his biographer before the event occurred, not reconstructed afterward from memory, which is the primary weakness in verifying most historical prediction stories. Here is the twist that most retellings of the Twain story miss entirely. Halley's comet has one more astonishing connection to the story, and it involves the future, not just the past. Halley's comet will make its next perihelion approach in 2061, a date that is now, itself, the subject of scientific prediction with far greater precision than anything available to Twain in 1909. Modern orbital mechanics, refined by supercomputers and centuries of additional observational data, can predict the comet's exact position to within hours, over a century in advance. This means the very same astronomical knowledge that allowed Twain to make his famous guess has become dramatically more precise in the century since his death, a direct scientific legacy connecting his story to ongoing astronomical research today. And here is the detail that gives the story its final, genuinely strange twist. Twain's daughter, Clara Clemens, in interviews given later in her life, stated that in his final days, her father remained lucid enough to discuss the approaching comet with visitors, and appeared to find peace specifically in the idea that his life would form a complete astronomical cycle, arriving and departing with the same celestial object. Whether coincidence, self-fulfilling psychological effect on a declining body, or genuine cosmic symmetry, Mark Twain got the ending he wanted. And the science behind why he could reasonably expect it is a genuinely fascinating piece of astronomical history in its own right. Mark Twain didn't predict his death using mysticism or supernatural insight. He used real astronomical science, applied with wit and clear-eyed realism to his own declining health, and against genuinely reasonable odds, he was right. It remains one of history's most famous and best documented predicted deaths, not because it defies explanation, but because the explanation itself, when you actually examine it, is remarkable enough on its own. Halley's comet will return in 2061. Somewhere, another person born under its light in recent decades may already be making their own quiet calculations. What do you think? Coincidence, or something more? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the Hidden Archive, a new mystery, every week, where history hides its secrets. End.